Summer. It was supposed to be about freedom, sun, fun, and sleeping in late. Instead, I was stuck in a greasy fast food joint, flipping burgers under fluorescent lights, the night shift, the graveyard shift. My friends were out having a blast, and I was here serving up fries and boredom. At first, it wasn't so bad. The first few weeks were quiet, peaceful even. Just me, the hum of the fryer, and the occasional truck driver looking for coffee and conversation. Time crawled by, but at least it crawled peacefully. Then, she showed up. It was during a particularly slow Wednesday night. I was wiping down the counters, lost in thought, when a beat-up blue car rolled up to the drive-thru. Nothing unusual, right? Wrong. Because behind the wheel was a woman who would make this summer a whole lot less boring, and a whole lot more terrifying. She had this wild, frizzy hair that made her look like she'd stuck her finger in an electrical socket. Her eyes were wide and darting, like she was expecting something to jump out at her. But the thing that got me the most was her smile. It wasn't a mean smile. Not exactly. It was more like a broken smile. Like she had forgotten how to do it properly. "Welcome to Burger Palace. Can I take your order?" I mumbled into the headset, trying to sound awake. "I'll have a large coffee," she rasped, her voice like sandpaper on wood. Black as night. Standard order, creepy voice. I shrugged it off and told her the total. As she pulled up to the window, I couldn't help but notice she was talking to herself. Or at least that's what it looked like. Her head was bobbing and her lips were moving, but there was no one else in the car. "Here's your coffee, ma'am," I said, trying not to make eye contact. She grabbed the coffee, her fingers long and bony, and that broken smile spread across her face again. "Thanks, hon. He says you're doing a real good job." He? Who was he? I wanted to ask, but something about her gaze made me swallow my words. She took a long gulp of the coffee, then sped off into the night. Just like that, she was gone. But the memory of her, the unease she left behind, it lingered long after her taillights disappeared. She became a regular after that. Every night, like clockwork, that beat-up blue car would roll up to the drive-thru. Crazy Kathy, my coworker John started calling her, and the name stuck. At first I tried to ignore her, but it was hard, because every night it was the same routine. The black coffee, the mumbling, the whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. And always that line, "He says you're doing a real good job." Who was this he she kept talking about? Was she talking to a ghost? An imaginary friend? The possibilities, as unsettling as they were, began to consume my thoughts. The curiosity, it was like an itch I couldn't scratch. One night, I decided to get a closer look. As Crazy Kathy rambled on about something I couldn't quite make out, I pretended to refill the napkin dispenser by the window. Casually, I glanced into her car. Her hands, those bony fingers I remembered, were gripping the steering wheel so tightly they were white. Her eyes were fixed on something beyond the windshield, something I couldn't see. And her whispers, they were louder now, more intense, like she was arguing with someone. But there was still no one else in the car. Fear, cold and clammy, snaked its way down my spine. What if she wasn't crazy? What if there was actually someone, something, in the car with her that I couldn't see? I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. The next few nights were torture. Every time Crazy Susan pulled up, I could feel my pulse quicken. I'd avoid eye contact, rush her order, and pray she'd just take her coffee and leave. But the fear, the curiosity, it was a potent mix. I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. One night, I decided to do something crazy, something stupid. I was going to talk to her. I was going to ask her about him. When her car rolled up, I took a deep breath and walked to the window. She was mumbling to herself, her eyes glazed over. "Here's your coffee, ma'am," I said, my voice trembling slightly. She looked up, that broken smile flickering across her face. And then, to my surprise, she handed me a piece of paper. "He said to give this to you," she rasped. It was a list of names. 10 names in total, scribbled in messy handwriting. All except for the last one, which was circled multiple times in red ink. My heart skipped a beat. This was getting weirder by the second. What is this?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. She just stared at me, her eyes boring into mine. "He says you'll know what to do," she said, her voice eerily calm. And with that, she took her coffee, rolled up her window, and drove away. I stood there for a moment, the list trembling in my hand, my mind racing. Who was this he? What did these names mean? And why was the last one circled? I looked down at the last name on the list. It was my name. My blood ran cold. Suddenly, the night shift wasn't just boring anymore. It was terrifying. I didn't know what was going on, but I knew one thing. I was in way over my head. The next few days were a blur. I told John about Crazy Susan, about the list, about the fear that was gnawing at me. He didn't believe me, of course. He just laughed and told me I'd been watching too many horror movies. But I knew better. I never saw Crazy Susan again. But I never forgot her either. And every now and then, late at night, when the world is quiet, I can still hear her voice, a raspy whisper in the darkness. "He says you're doing a real good job."
Megamart Mall, you know the type. A sprawling behemoth of consumerism, standing tall and imposing against the night sky. Sprawling complex just off the interstate. Big box stores, fast food joints, enough asphalt to pave a small country. The parking lot, a vast sea of emptiness, only interrupted by the occasional car of a late-night shopper or an employee finishing their shift. I've worked my share of dirty jobs, but security guard wasn't exactly my calling. Yet here I was, donning the uniform, flashlight in hand and a radio clipped to my belt. But a man's gotta eat, right? So there I was, 3 weeks into the job, graveyard shift at the biggest megamart in Missouri. The pay was decent, and the hours, though grueling, had a certain quiet charm to them. My partner, Raj, was on a bathroom break, leaving me alone with the echoing silence and flickering fluorescent lights. The kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every creak and groan of the building. My main duty? Patrol. Every hour, on the hour, I had to make my rounds. Walking through the empty corridors, checking each store, making sure everything was locked up tight. Check the doors. Make sure the gates were down. Keep an eye out for anything fishy. It was a routine that had become second nature. A monotonous dance through the deserted mall. It was boring as watching paint dry, but hey, at least it was indoors and away from the weather. No rain, no wind, just the controlled climate of the megamart. Besides, the extra pay for the night shift was a nice bonus. It made the long hours and the eerie silence a bit more bearable. So there I was, halfway through my 11 p.m. patrol. The mall was a ghost town, every store closed, every corridor empty. The only sounds were my own footsteps and the distant hum of the refrigerators in the closed grocery store. It was a symphony of solitude, a soundtrack to my nightly vigil. Everything seemed normal, just another quiet night in the belly of the retail beast. The cameras showed nothing out of the ordinary, just the usual stillness. Little did I know things were about to get weird. The kind of weird that makes you question reality, that makes you wonder if you're truly alone in the dark. As I rounded the corner by the electronics store, I thought I heard something. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A sound that didn't belong in the stillness of the night. A soft thump, like something falling. I stopped, holding my breath, listening hard. The silence was thick, almost tangible, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. Silence. Must be my imagination, I muttered to myself. But the feeling of unease lingered, gnawing at the edges of my mind. The silence in a place like this could play tricks on you. I continued my patrol, the hair on the back of my neck starting to prickle. Every shadow seemed to move. Every creak of the building settling sounded like a footstep. As I approached the target, the largest store in the mall, I heard it again. This time, it was louder, more distinct. A sound that sent a chill down my spine. This time, there was no mistaking it. A distinct crashing sound, followed by the unmistakable clatter of plastic on tile. It echoed through the empty corridors, amplifying the sense of isolation. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. It definitely came from inside the target. The mannequin stood eerily still, casting long shadows in the dim light. My hand instinctively went to the heavy mag light on my belt. Dale always teased me about carrying it, said it was overkill. But in moments like this, it felt like a lifeline. "What are you gonna do, Mike? Club a shoplifter to death?" he'd say. His words echoed in my mind, a reminder of the mundane normalcy of our usual nights. Well, right now I was feeling pretty glad for the reassuring weight of that flashlight in my hand. It was more than just a tool. It was a symbol of security in the face of the unknown. I took a deep breath and stepped forward, ready to face whatever was waiting in the darkness. Taking a deep breath, I used my radio to try and raise Dale. Static. Of course. The cheap radios they gave us never worked properly, especially not in this concrete jungle. I considered my options. My orders were clear. No unnecessary risks. I could just continue my patrol, report the noise in the morning, but what if someone was inside? What if they were hurt? Cursing under my breath, I walked towards the target entrance. The metal security gate was down, padlocked securely for the night. I peered through the metal bars into the darkened store. The faint glow of the emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows across the aisles. And that's when I saw it. A mannequin, dressed in a summer dress, lay sprawled on the floor, its plastic limbs at unnatural angles. It hadn't been there during my previous rounds. I knew that for a fact. Adrenaline surged through me, chasing away the last vestiges of sleepiness. Someone was definitely inside. The eerie silence of the mall at night was broken only by the distant hum of the air conditioning. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to steady my breathing. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking slightly, and unlocked the padlock on the gate. The cold metal felt heavy in my hands, and I could feel the sweat forming on my brow. Each second felt like an eternity as I struggled to get the key into the lock. The metal rattled loudly as I lifted it, the sound echoing in the stillness. It was as if the entire mall was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. The noise seemed to amplify my anxiety, making my movements even more deliberate and cautious. "Hello?" I called out, my voice hoarse. The words seemed to hang in the air, unanswered. I strained my ears, hoping to catch any sound that might indicate another presence. But there was nothing, just the oppressive silence. "Security, is anyone in there?" Only silence answered me. The emptiness of the store felt almost tangible, like a heavy blanket pressing down on me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the rising tide of fear. Swallowing my fear, I stepped inside, the gate clanging shut behind me. The sound was final, like a door closing on any chance of retreat. I was committed now, and there was no turning back. I shone my flashlight down the aisles, the beam cutting through the darkness. The light revealed rows of merchandise, casting long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance and shift as I moved. Rows upon rows of clothing racks, empty shopping carts, and mannequins. They stood like silent sentinels, their presence adding to the surreal atmosphere of the deserted store. Their blank faces seemed to stare back at me, their plastic smiles suddenly sinister in the flickering light. It was as if they were mocking me, daring me to find the intruder. I moved cautiously through the store, adrenaline sharpening my senses. Every shadow seemed to hide a potential threat, and I found myself jumping at the slightest sound. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of clothing on a rack sent shivers down my spine. The store felt like a living entity, its every sound a reminder of my vulnerability. I checked behind displays, in restrooms, even inside the dressing rooms. Empty. Each empty space only heightened my sense of unease, making me question my own perceptions. There was no sign of forced entry, no other indication of an intruder. It was as if the store itself was playing tricks on me, making me doubt what I had seen. But I knew what I had seen. The image of the shadowy figure was burned into my mind, a stark contrast to the empty store around me. That mannequin hadn't knocked itself over, had it? The question lingered unanswered as I continued my search, determined to find an explanation for the night's events.
The air hung heavy and still, like it always did before a storm in Sunflower County. The kind of stillness that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I sat at my desk, the worn leather warm beneath my hand. The familiar creak of the chair was a small comfort in the otherwise silent room. 10 years I had spent as Sheriff Thompson's right-hand man. 10 years of chasing shadows and keeping the peace in our quiet corner of Mississippi. Each photograph on the wall told a story, a memory of the countless nights spent on duty. The clock on the wall ticked past 9 p.m., the numbers glowing faintly in the dimly lit office. Time seemed to move slower on nights like these, each second stretching into eternity. Another night on patrol, another night watching over folks sleeping soundly, unaware of the darkness that lurked just beyond their doorsteps. The quiet streets were a stark contrast to the turmoil that sometimes brewed beneath the surface. I pulled on my Stetson, the familiar weight settling on my head. It was more than just a hat. It was a symbol of the responsibility I carried. Sheriff Thompson was out of town, leaving me in charge. The badge on the desk seemed to gleam a little brighter, a reminder of the duty I had sworn to uphold. It was a responsibility I didn't take lightly. Every decision, every action, weighed heavily on my mind. The radio crackled with static, a voice cutting through the noise, dispatch reporting a possible break-in at Miller's convenience store on Highway 61. My heart rate quickened, the calm of the night shattered by the urgency in the dispatcher's voice. "Looks like this quiet night is about to get interesting," I muttered to myself, grabbing my keys and heading out into the night. The familiar jingle of the keys was a small comfort as I prepared for whatever lay ahead. My boots echoed on the pavement as I walked towards my patrol car. Each step was a reminder of the path I had chosen, the duty I had embraced. The engine rumbled to life, a comforting sound in the stillness of the night. It was a familiar ritual, one that grounded me in the midst of uncertainty. The air was thick with humidity and the scent of honeysuckle, a strange mix of beauty and unease. It was a reminder that even in the darkest times there was still a touch of grace. As I pulled out onto the deserted main street, headlights cutting through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was going to be different. There was an electricity in the air, a sense that something significant was about to unfold. The siren wailed, a lonely sound cutting through the night as I sped down Highway 61. The road stretched out before me, an endless ribbon of asphalt under the moonlight, the only company being the occasional flicker of headlights from distant cars. Miller's convenience store, a beacon of fluorescent light amidst the cotton fields, came into view. It stood out starkly against the dark backdrop of the night, its lights almost too bright, too harsh. 2 patrol cars were already parked haphazardly outside, their flashing lights painting the asphalt in stripes of red and blue. The scene was chaotic, yet eerily quiet, the silence only broken by the occasional crackle of police radios. I pulled up behind them, my gut tightening. The tension in the air was palpable, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. This was no ordinary break-in. The atmosphere was charged with an intensity that suggested something far more sinister. I stepped out into the still night, the air thick with tension. Every sound seemed amplified, from the crunch of gravel under my boots to the distant hum of the store's neon sign. Officer Johnson, a rookie still wet behind the ears, hurried towards me, his face pale under the flashing lights. His eyes were wide with a mix of fear and determination. "Sheriff's deputy," he stammered. "We got a situation here." His voice wavered, betraying his inexperience and the gravity of the situation. He led me inside, his hand hovering nervously over his holster. The store was a mess, signs of a struggle evident everywhere. Old man Miller, his face ashen, sat slumped behind the counter. His eyes were hollow, reflecting the shock and fear of the night's events. The cash register lay on the floor, its drawer empty. Coins and bills were scattered around, a testament to the hurried nature of the crime. "Just a couple of kids, Sheriff's deputy," Old man Miller croaked, his voice trembling. They took off with the register money, headed south on foot. His words were filled with a mix of anger and helplessness. I surveyed the scene, noting the overturned cigarette display and the scattered lottery tickets. The chaos was overwhelming, but it was clear that the perpetrators were amateurs. It was a messy robbery, but thankfully, no one was hurt. The relief was palpable, but the urgency to catch the culprits was even stronger. "Don't you worry, Mr. Miller," I said, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We'll catch those punks." My words were meant to comfort, but they also carried a promise. I radioed for backup, requesting assistance in setting up a perimeter. This wasn't over yet. The night was far from done, and the hunt was just beginning. An hour later, with the robbery suspects still at large, I found myself driving down Magnolia Avenue. It was a quiet residential street, lined with oak trees and Victorian houses that whispered stories of a bygone era. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows that danced with the wind. Something felt off. A prickle of unease crawled up my spine. My years on the force had taught me to trust my gut. That's when I saw it. A lone car parked halfway down the block, its headlights off, engine idling. It was a sleek black sedan, out of place in this quiet neighborhood. I slowed down, my hand instinctively reaching for the radio mic. "Dispatch, this is Sheriff's deputy," I reported, my voice low. "I'm on Magnolia Avenue, got a suspicious vehicle here, black sedan, no plates visible." My words hung in the air, unanswered. The radio crackled with static, the signal lost in the maze of old sprawling trees. A wave of unease washed over me. This was not right. I pulled up behind the sedan, my headlights illuminating the vehicle. It was a late-model Cadillac, its dark windows giving nothing away. My heart pounded against my ribs, a drumbeat of anticipation. This was shaping up to be more than just a routine patrol. I stepped out of my patrol car, the slam of the door echoing in the stillness. The night was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that makes you hyper-aware of every little sound. The scent of honeysuckle hung heavy in the air, now laced with the smell of exhaust fumes. It was a strange mix, almost unsettling, as if nature and machine were clashing in the darkness. My hand hovered over my holster, a sense of unease prickling at the back of my neck. The street was deserted, but the tension was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Slowly, cautiously, I approached the driver's side of the Cadillac. Each step felt deliberate, my senses on high alert, scanning for any sign of danger. The streetlight above cast a flickering glow on the tinted window, obscuring the occupant within. The intermittent light added to the sense of mystery and foreboding. I raised my hand and rapped my knuckles against the glass. The sound was sharp, almost jarring, breaking the stillness of the night. The sound seemed to reverberate in the silence. It was as if the entire street was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. For a moment, nothing happened. The suspense was almost unbearable, each second stretching out longer than the last. Then, slowly, the driver's side window began to descend, revealing the face of a young man. His expression was a mix of confusion and fatigue. He looked to be in his early 20s with tired eyes and a mop of dark hair. His face was pale and he seemed disoriented, as if he had just woken up. He wore a rumpled suit, his tie loosened as if he had been working late. The creases in his clothes suggested he had been in them for far too long. "Evening, sir," I said, my voice firm but polite. "Can I see your license and registration, please?" My training kicked in, keeping my tone professional. The young man blinked slowly, as if startled by my presence. His reaction was delayed, almost as if he was processing the situation in slow motion. He fumbled in his pockets, his movements sluggish and uncoordinated. It was clear he was struggling to focus, his hands shaking slightly. I must have dozed off, officer," he mumbled, his voice slurred. "Didn't realize I was parked." His words trailed off and I could hear the exhaustion in his voice. He trailed off, his gaze drifting past me, his eyes wide with what looked like fear. Something wasn't right. His sudden shift in focus made me uneasy. His behavior was setting off alarm bells in my head. I knew I had to stay alert, every instinct telling me to be cautious.
My name is Emily. I've always felt different, like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit. A shadow followed me, a sadness I couldn't shake. Anxiety gripped me, made it hard to breathe, hard to be around people. For years, I pretended everything was okay. I smiled, I worked, I went through the motions, but inside I was crumbling. I felt so alone, lost in my own world. Every day felt like a battle. I was tired of fighting, tired of pretending. I knew I needed help, but reaching out felt impossible. Shame kept me silent, locked in my own fear. My life was small, confined to my tiny apartment and my solitary job at the library. Books were my refuge, the characters within their pages my only true companions. One day my beloved aunt passed away. She was the closest thing to family I had left. She left me her old hotel, a grand but decaying building on the rugged coast. I didn't want to go. The thought of leaving my comfort zone, my routine, filled me with dread. But something drew me to that old hotel. A faint whisper of hope, perhaps, or the desperate need for a significant change. The hotel was imposing, its silence deafening. Dust lay thick on the furniture, and the air hung heavy with the scent of time and neglect. I wandered through its empty halls, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. Strange things started happening. I'd hear whispers at night, soft murmurs that vanished when I turned on the light. Doors creaked open on their own, and shadows danced at the edge of my vision. Fear gnawed at me. I told myself it was just the wind, the age of the building, but deep down I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, that something else was here with me. While cleaning out my aunt's belongings, I found a small velvet pouch hidden away in a drawer. It was tucked so far back that it seemed almost as if it was meant to be forgotten. The pouch was delicate, its fabric worn and faded, hinting at its age and the secrets it might hold. Inside lay a key, old and ornate, made of tarnished silver. The intricate designs on the key were mesmerizing, each curve and line telling a story of its own. It was unlike any key I had ever seen before, almost as if it belonged to another era. It was cold to the touch, sending a shiver down my spine. The chill was unexpected, almost as if the key held a life of its own. I couldn't shake off the feeling that this key was special, that it had a purpose waiting to be discovered. That night I dreamt of a woman in a long white dress. She appeared ethereal, almost ghostly, her presence both comforting and unsettling. The room around her was dark, but she seemed to glow with a soft, otherworldly light. She stood at the end of a hallway, beckoning me forward. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. I felt an inexplicable urge to follow her, to uncover the mystery she represented. In her outstretched hand she held a key identical to the one I had found. The sight of it sent a jolt through me, connecting the dream to my reality in a way that felt almost magical. It was as if the key was a bridge between our worlds. The dream felt real, the woman's sadness palpable. Her sorrow seemed to seep into my very being, making my heart ache with an emotion I couldn't quite understand. It was clear that she needed my help, and the key was the answer. When I woke up, my heart was pounding, and the key seemed to thrum with a faint energy. It was as if the dream had left a residue of its magic on the key, making it pulse with a life of its own. I knew this was no ordinary key. I knew I had to find out what it unlocked. The key held a mystery that was begging to be solved, and I felt a deep sense of responsibility to uncover its secrets. My journey had just begun, and I was determined to see it through. The hotel became a labyrinth of hidden passages and locked rooms. Each corner I turned seemed to lead me deeper into its mysterious depths, and every locked door whispered secrets of the past. I searched everywhere, driven by a force I couldn't explain. It was as if the walls themselves were guiding me, urging me to uncover what lay hidden within their confines. The fear was still there, but it was different now. It had transformed from a paralyzing dread into a motivating force, pushing me to face the unknown. It didn't paralyze me. It pushed me forward. Days turned into weeks, and my determination only grew stronger. The more I explored, the more I felt a strange connection to this place. I lost track of time, consumed by my search. Hours blended into days and days into weeks. The outside world seemed to fade away as I delved deeper into the hotel's mysteries. The hotel, once a symbol of my loneliness, became a strange source of comfort. Its eerie silence was now a soothing presence, and its dark corners felt like a protective embrace. It held secrets, yes, but also the promise of discovery. Each new find was a piece of a larger puzzle, and with every revelation I felt a step closer to understanding the hotel's true nature. One afternoon, I found a hidden door tucked away behind a dusty tapestry. The key fit perfectly. It was as if it had been waiting for me all along, a final test of my resolve. My hand trembled as I turned it, the lock clicking open with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the corridor, a signal that I was about to uncover the hotel's deepest secret. The room was small and dusty, filled with old books and forgotten belongings. But it was the window that caught my attention. It overlooked the sea, a vast expanse of blue stretching out before me. And then I saw them. People, families laughing on the beach, children building sandcastles. The sight of them, so full of life, brought tears to my eyes. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. I realized that the walls I had built around myself were just that, walls. They could be broken down. I could choose to open myself up to the world, to let people in. The journey wasn't easy. It was filled with moments of doubt and uncertainty, where every step forward felt like a battle against an invisible force. There were days when the darkness threatened to consume me again. The rain tapping against the window seemed to echo my inner turmoil, and the solitude of my room felt like a prison. But I held on to the memory of that view, the breathtaking sunrise that painted the sky with hope. It was a reminder that beauty and light still existed, even if they felt out of reach. The feeling of hope it had ignited within me. I started small. I smiled at strangers, even when it felt unnatural. Each smile was a tiny victory, a step towards reclaiming my sense of self. I struck up conversations at the local cafe, where the warmth of human connection began to thaw the coldness inside me. The laughter shared over coffee became a lifeline. I even joined a book club, a place where stories came alive and brought people together. Sharing my love of stories with others was a way to find common ground and build new friendships. Each discussion, each shared book, was a step towards healing. It was in these moments that I began to see the possibility of a brighter future. Slowly, tentatively, I began to heal. Meditation in the park became a sanctuary, a place where I could breathe deeply and find peace within myself. The whispers in the hotel never went away, but they became less menacing. They were no longer a source of fear, but a part of the building's character. They didn't frighten me anymore. Instead, they reminded me of my journey, of the strength I had found within myself to face my fears. They were a reminder of how far I had come, of the battles I had fought and won. Each photograph, each meaningful object was a testament to my resilience. The strength I had found within myself was something to be proud of. It was a reminder that I was capable of overcoming even the darkest of times. The old hotel, once a symbol of my isolation, had transformed into a monument of my resilience. It stood tall, just as I had learned to do. It became a testament to my resilience, a reminder that I had the strength to rebuild my life. Walking away from it, I felt a newfound confidence, a reminder that even in the darkest of places, there is always a glimmer of light. We can find the courage to step into the light, to embrace the future with hope. We can find the courage to step into the light. The journey is never easy, but it is always worth it. Each step forward is a testament to our strength and resilience.
The fluorescent lights buzzed above, casting a sterile glow over the aisles of Priceco. Another night shift at the grocery store. I'd been doing this for a while, stocking shelves, tidying up, the usual. My manager, Jake, was a good guy, always there to lend a hand, cracking jokes to keep the monotony at bay. We had a system, a rhythm to our nights. He'd handle the inventory, I'd manage the floor. Clock in, clock out, repeat. But this night, things felt different. A chill hung in the air, heavier than usual. Maybe it was just me, but the silence between restocking shelves seemed louder. Even the usual hum of the refrigerators seemed to falter. I tried to shake off the feeling. It was probably nothing, just my mind playing tricks. The air vents blew, sending a shiver down my spine. I pulled my jacket a bit tighter around myself, trying to ward off the sudden cold. It was strange, I thought, how the temperature could change so drastically inside the store. I glanced at Jake, but he seemed unfazed, engrossed in checking the inventory list. "Hey, Jake," I called out, pushing my trolley towards him. "Did Sarah call? I thought she was supposed to be on cleaning duty tonight." Typically, the three of us made up the night shift crew. It made the time pass faster, having someone else to chat with between restocking. "Yeah, just got off the phone with her. Poor thing's come down with a nasty flu," Jake replied, not looking up from his clipboard. "Said she woke up feeling awful, couldn't even stand up straight." He scribbled something down, his brow furrowed in concentration. "That's awful," I said, a sudden pang of sympathy hitting me. "Hope it's not anything serious." It was strange, though. Sarah was usually so healthy. "Guess it's just you and me tonight, then," I added, trying to sound cheerful despite the eerie feeling that had settled over me. Jake finally looked up, a strange look flashing across his face. He hesitated for a moment, then said, "Yeah, just us." He cleared his throat, and for a moment I almost thought I saw a flicker of unease in his eyes, but just as quickly it was gone. The hours ticked by, each one feeling longer than the last. We worked mostly in silence, the only sounds the clatter of cans and the squeak of our shoes on the linoleum floor. I was halfway through stacking a pyramid of canned peaches when I heard Jake mutter something under his breath. "What was that, Jake?" I asked, turning to face him. He was staring towards the back of the store, his eyes narrowed. The back was shrouded in shadows, the only light coming from the emergency exit sign above the door. "I thought I saw someone back there," he said, his voice low, "by the frozen foods." He took a step forward, peering into the darkness. He was probably just tired, I told myself. "It was easy to let your imagination run wild this late at night. Probably just boxes, Jake," I said, trying to sound reassuring. But even as I said it, a shiver ran down my spine. There was an edge to Jake's voice that I'd never heard before, a tension that made the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. Jake didn't reply. Instead, he walked towards the back of the store, his footsteps echoing in the silence. "Just going to check something out," he called over his shoulder. I watched him disappear into the darkness, my unease growing with each passing second. Minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. Still no sign of Jake. I tried to focus on my work, but the silence was deafening. Where could he be? The back room was small, just a storage area for extra stock. It wouldn't take him long to check it out. A sudden clatter from the back startled me, making me jump. My heart pounded in my chest. "Jake!" I called out, my voice trembling slightly. Silence. A knot of fear tightened in my stomach. Something was wrong, very wrong. I cautiously made my way towards the back of the store, my heart pounding in my ears. The fluorescent lights seemed to flicker, casting long dancing shadows on the walls. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if I were wading through thick mud. As I neared the back room, a cold draft hit me, sending a shiver down my spine. The storage room door was ajar, and a sense of dread washed over me. I pushed open the door to the back room, my heart racing. "Jake!" I called out, my voice echoing in the empty space, but there was no answer. The room was empty except for the usual clutter of boxes and crates. Panic clawed at my throat. Where could he be? I checked the aisles again, my eyes frantically searching every nook and cranny. Nothing. Jake was gone. My hands trembled as I reached for the phone and dialed 911. The operator's calm voice on the other end did little to ease the fear that was gripping me. The police arrived quickly, their faces grim as I recounted the events of the last hour. They questioned me thoroughly, but I couldn't offer much. Jake had just vanished. They reviewed the security footage, their faces growing more serious with each passing minute. And then they saw it, a figure shrouded in darkness lurking near the back of the store. The figure moved quickly, almost too quickly to be human, and approached Jake just as he disappeared into the back room. The footage was grainy, but there was no mistaking it. Someone had taken Jake. The days that followed were a blur of police interviews, missing person posters, and sleepless nights. The guilt gnawed at me. I should have gone with him, should have sensed something was wrong. The police had no leads, no suspects. The figure in the security footage was a ghost, a phantom that had swallowed my friend whole. Weeks later, just as I was beginning to lose hope, a package arrived. It was addressed to me with no return address. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside, a single VHS tape. I rushed to the TV, my heart pounding in my chest, and slotted the tape in. The screen flickered to life, and there he was. Jake. His face was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot, but he was alive. He spoke in a hushed, urgent tone, explaining that he'd been kidnapped, held captive in a windowless room. He described his escape a desperate scramble through darkness, the fear of being caught. The video ended abruptly, leaving me with more questions than answers. The police analyzed the tape, searching for any clue to Jake's whereabouts, but it was a dead end. The background was nondescript, the location untraceable. The nightmare was over, but the mystery remained. Who was that figure in the shadows? Why had they taken Jake? And where was he now? Life moved on, but the memory of that night lingered. The fear subsided, replaced by a dull ache of unanswered questions. The experience changed me, left me with a constant awareness of the shadows, a sense that things are not always what they seem. I still work at Priceco, but the aisles seem different now, haunted by the ghost of that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the fluorescent lights sends a shiver down my spine. I scan the faces of the customers, searching for a familiar glint in their eyes, a hint of something sinister lurking beneath the surface. I know Jake is out there somewhere, and I haven't given up hope that one day the shadows will part and he will finally come home.
The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting a sterile glow over the rows of cages. The hum was a constant companion, a background score to the symphony of the night shift. It was 2 a.m., the heart of my shift at the local animal shelter. The world outside was asleep, but inside, life continued in its own quiet way. The air hung heavy with the smells of disinfectant and animal fur, a strange but comforting perfume. It was a scent that had become familiar, almost reassuring in its consistency. Most nights it was just me and the animals, their sounds echoing in the stillness. The occasional bark or meow broke the silence, a reminder that I wasn't truly alone. The clock on the wall ticked by with agonizing slowness, each tick a reminder of the long hours stretching ahead. Time seemed to move differently in the quiet of the night. Sleep beckoned, but duty called. Someone had to watch over these abandoned souls. Each animal depended on me, and that responsibility kept me going. My eyelids felt heavy, gritty with exhaustion. The weight of the day and night pressed down on me, but I couldn't afford to give in. I'd been working the night shift at the shelter for the past few months, juggling school and a part-time job during the day. It was a delicate balance, but one I managed with determination. It wasn't glamorous, but it was rewarding in its own way. The satisfaction of knowing I was making a difference, no matter how small, kept me motivated. Cleaning cages, feeding, and walking the animals, these were my nightly rituals, a symphony of barks, meows, and rustling newspapers. Each task was a step towards giving these animals a better life. Each animal had a story, a reason for being here, and each deserved a second chance. Their eyes held stories of past lives, and I was determined to help them find new beginnings. The shelter was a cacophony of sounds, the plaintive meows of abandoned kittens, their tiny voices echoing through the halls, the excited yips of puppies eager for attention, their tails wagging furiously as they jumped up and down, hoping to catch someone's eye, and the occasional mournful howl of a lonely dog, its sad eyes searching for a friend in the sea of faces. It was a lot to handle, especially during the night when the silence amplified every sound, every rustle, every whimper. The quiet of the night made the shelter feel even more alive, every noise a reminder of the lives within. But amidst the chaos there was a strange kind of peace, a calm that settled over the shelter, a momentary respite from the day's hustle and bustle. I found solace in their company, in their unconditional love and simple joys. The way they looked at me with trust and hope, it was a bond that words couldn't describe. The way a dog's tail thumped against the floor when I approached, a rhythmic beat that spoke of happiness and anticipation, the soft purr of a contented cat rubbing against my leg. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile. These small gestures were a balm to my tired soul. They reminded me of the simple joys in life, the pure, unfiltered emotions that animals bring. They reminded me that life, even in this concrete jungle of cages, could be beautiful, could be resilient. The hope in their eyes, the strength in their spirits, it was a testament to the enduring power of love and care. One particular night, however, the usual rhythm of the shelter was disrupted. I was making my rounds, checking on the animals, when I noticed a shadow flicker at the edge of my vision. Startled, I turned towards the entrance, my heart pounding in my chest. The shelter was never visited at this hour, especially not by people. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I made out the figure of a woman standing hesitantly at the door. She was clutching a small bundle in her arms, her face obscured by the shadows. A shiver ran down my spine. There was something about her presence, an air of desperation that sent a chill down my spine. Section 4, A Stranger in the Night. Cautiously I approached her, my hand hovering near the walkie-talkie clipped to my belt. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice betraying a hint of nervousness. The woman flinched slightly at my voice, her grip tightening on the bundle in her arms. I need your help, she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. Please, you have to take her. I can't. I don't have a choice. Her words tumbled out in a rush, laced with a desperation that was impossible to ignore. I peered at the bundle she held so tightly, my curiosity piqued. As she shifted slightly, the edge of a blanket fell away, revealing the tiny face of a sleeping puppy. It was so small, so vulnerable, its chest rising and falling with each shallow breath. What happened? Why can't you keep her? I asked gently, my initial apprehension giving way to concern. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting around nervously as if afraid of being overheard. Taking a deep breath, she launched into her story, her voice thick with emotion. She spoke of unforeseen circumstances, of a life turned upside down, of the heart-wrenching decision to give up a beloved pet. Her story was far from unique. We heard similar tales every day at the shelter. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of something more, that hinted at a story untold. As she finished speaking, she thrust the puppy into my arms, tears streaming down her face. Please, she pleaded, her voice choked with emotion. Take care of her. Promise me you'll find her a good home. And with that, she turned and disappeared into the night, leaving me standing there with a puppy in my arms and a heart full of questions. That night, as I settled the puppy into a warm bed, I couldn't help but feel a sense of responsibility. This tiny creature, so vulnerable and innocent, had been thrust into my care. It was a moment that made me reflect on the fragility of life and the unexpected turns it can take, and watched her drift off to sleep, her tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. In that peaceful moment, I felt a connection, a bond that transcended words. It was as if she knew she was safe, and that gave me a profound sense of purpose. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had witnessed a mere fragment of a much larger story. Who was that woman, and what had driven her to our doorstep in the dead of night? Her eyes had told a story of desperation and hope, a story that I would never fully know. And what had driven her to our doorstep in the dead of night? The questions lingered in my mind, unanswered and haunting. What circumstances had led her to make such a difficult decision? It was a reminder that everyone has a story, often hidden beneath the surface. I never saw her again, but her story, like the countless others I encountered at the shelter, stayed with me. Each one was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the lengths we go to protect those we love. But her story, like the countless others I encountered at the shelter, served as a poignant reminder of life's unpredictable nature. Every day brought new challenges and new faces, each with their own unique story, served as a poignant reminder of life's unpredictable nature. It taught me that every face, every encounter, holds a story waiting to be heard. These stories, though often filled with hardship, also carried messages of hope and resilience. It taught me that every face, every encounter holds a story waiting to be heard. Each animal, each person, brought with them a narrative that added to the rich tapestry of life at the shelter, holds a story waiting to be heard. It taught me that compassion and understanding are often the most valuable things we can offer each other. In those moments of connection, we find the strength to carry on. It taught me that compassion and understanding are often the most valuable things we can offer each other. These simple acts of kindness can make a world of difference, providing comfort and hope in times of need. And it taught me that even in the darkest of nights there is always a glimmer of hope. It may come in the form of a kind gesture, a warm bed, or a safe place to rest. Hope, like a stray animal seeking shelter, can appear when we least expect it. It reminds us that no matter how dire the situation, there is always a chance for a new beginning. It can appear when we least expect it, forever changing the course of our lives. These moments of unexpected grace are what make life so beautifully unpredictable, forever changing the course of our lives. They teach us to embrace the unknown and to find strength in the face of uncertainty. In the end, it's these unexpected turns that shape who we are and who we become.
The city never sleeps, neither did I. Working nights at the club, you get used to a certain rhythm, the murmur of voices, the clinking of glasses, the music, a constant pulse beneath it all. Most of it was background noise, just part of the job. Except when I had to clean the bathrooms. It was always quiet then. Too quiet. That night was no different. The air hung heavy with the smell of stale cigarette smoke and spilled beer. I was mopping up near the back, lost in thought. That's when I heard them. Their voices, sharp and low, sliced through the quiet. They were arguing. I peeked out from the bathroom doorway, my heart pounding in my chest. The dim light cast eerie shadows, making everything seem more intense. There they were, a couple, tucked away in a dark corner booth, almost hidden from view. The atmosphere around them was thick with tension. She was beautiful, with sad eyes and a dress that shimmered under the disco ball. Her gaze was distant, lost in thoughts that seemed to weigh heavily on her. He was older, with a scowl etched deep on his face. His presence was intimidating, a stark contrast to her fragile demeanor. He leaned in close, his voice a menacing growl. The words he spoke were inaudible, but the tone was unmistakably harsh. She just sat there, staring into her drink as if it held the answers to her unspoken questions. Her fingers traced the rim of the glass absent-mindedly. Then I saw him. A young man, barely out of his teens, sidling up to their table. His movements were hesitant, almost as if he was unsure of his place. He was trying to get their attention, his voice barely audible over the din of the club. His eyes darted nervously between the couple. He had this nervous energy about him, like he wasn't sure if he should be there. His hands fidgeted, betraying his anxiety. I knew that feeling. A lot of folks at the club did. The sense of not belonging, of being out of place, was all too familiar. Trying to mask their loneliness with loud music and cheap drinks, the club was a refuge for the lost, a place where everyone wore a mask. The young man leaned in, trying to talk to the woman. Big mistake, the older man exploded. He stood up so fast his chair toppled over backwards with a loud crash. Everyone in the club turned to look, everyone except the band. They just kept playing, oblivious to the drama unfolding in their midst. "Get away from my woman!" the older man roared. The young man stumbled back, his hands raised in defense. I just wanted to," he stammered. But the older man wasn't listening. He lunged, grabbing the young man by the shirt collar. It happened so fast, like a flash of lightning in a stormy night. 1 minute they were arguing, the next they were rolling on the floor, a tangle of limbs and fury. Someone screamed. The music stopped abruptly, leaving an eerie silence. I stood there, frozen, mop still in hand, unable to process the chaos unfolding before my eyes. By the time the bouncers pulled them apart, the young man was lying on the ground, his face bloody and contorted in pain. It wasn't pretty. Someone called an ambulance, their voice trembling with urgency. The sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as they approached, cutting through the night like a knife. The older man, his anger replaced by a cold, hard look, straightened his jacket and walked out of the club, leaving the woman behind without a second glance. She just sat there, staring at the spilled drinks and the broken glass, her face a mask of despair. The night had taken a dark turn, and the club was left in a state of disarray. The next few days were a blur. Everything seemed to move in slow motion, yet the world around me was spinning out of control. The police came and asked questions. They were thorough, leaving no stone unturned, trying to piece together the puzzle. I told them what I saw, or at least what I thought I saw in the chaos of that night, or at least I told them what I thought I saw. My mind was a jumble of images and sounds, none of it making any sense. It all happened so fast. The city never sleeps, and that night was no different. The lights, the noise, the confusion... It was overwhelming. It wasn't until a few days later that the real trouble started. The phone rang. It was late, and the silence of the night was broken by its shrill ring. I was just about to turn in for the night. My body was exhausted, but my mind was still racing with unanswered questions. The voice on the other end was low and dangerous. It sent a chill down my spine, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He didn't need to tell me his name. I recognized it instantly. The tone, the menace, it was unmistakable. It was the older man from the club, the one who had been watching me that night, his eyes never leaving me. He had a proposition for me. His voice was calm, but there was an underlying threat that was impossible to ignore. "You saw what happened the other night," he said. His words brought back the vivid images of that chaotic scene. "I need you to forget about it." His demand was clear, but the memory was seared into my mind, impossible to erase. Section 6, the video reveals all. The police called me down to the station. They wanted me to look at something, security footage. They had it all on tape, the fight, the ambulance, and me standing there watching it all. They asked me if I recognized anyone. I told them no. What else could I say? But as I watched the footage, my blood ran cold. There in the corner of the screen, I saw him, the man who had called me. He wasn't just a bystander, he was involved. And from the looks of it, he was the one who had called the ambulance. He had set me up. Section 7, a visit from a ghost. He found me a few days later. He was waiting for me outside my apartment, the same cold, hard look in his eyes. He didn't say much, didn't have to. The threat hung heavy in the air between us. He just stared at me, his silence speaking volumes. "Just be careful," he said, his voice barely a whisper. And then he was gone, melting back into the shadows like a ghost. I stood there for a long time, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew what I had to do, but was I brave enough to do it? Section 8. A heavy choice. The weight of the truth was a heavy burden to bear, but the thought of lying, of betraying my own conscience, was even heavier. So I made a choice. I went back to the police, told them everything, about the phone call, about the man in the shadows, about the fear that gnawed at my insides. They listened patiently, wrote everything down. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. They had seen it all before, the lies, the deceit, the desperation that drove people to do unspeakable things. They didn't believe me. Section 9. The weight of truth. I never found out what happened to the young man, or the woman with the sad eyes, or the man who had threatened me. Some things, I guess, are better left unsaid, but I carry that night with me still. The memory of it, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of our everyday lives. The city never sleeps, but sometimes it's the silence that keeps you awake at night. The silence of unspoken truths, the silence of fear, the silence of a choice made and the weight of its consequences.
High school. A time for textbooks, awkward dances, and first jobs. Mine was at a little eatery called Pete's Pizza Pies. Not glamorous, but it paid for comic books and arcade tokens. It was honest work. I learned the value of a hard-earned rupee. Little did I know it would also lead me to one of the strangest nights of my life. Days at Pete's were predictable. Taking orders, prepping food, the works, the usual hustle and bustle of a small restaurant. Most of my colleagues were fellow students or aspiring actors chasing their big break. We shared jokes, stories, and the occasional stolen pizza slice. It was a familiar routine, comforting, safe, until it wasn't. Late-night shifts were different. A skeleton crew remained. The energy was subdued. The air was thick with the silence of the sleeping city outside. It was during one such shift, shadows stretching with the late hour, that the ordinary transformed into the unsettling. The phone rang, a delivery order, routine, or so I thought. The address was unfamiliar, an area on the outskirts of town, desolate. The order was simple: 1 pepperoni pizza, extra cheese, no name. Just an address and a gruff voice on the other end. I set off, a sense of unease settling in the pit of my stomach. The further I drove, the more unfamiliar the surroundings became. Streetlights became scarce. Houses thinned out, replaced by overgrown fields and the occasional abandoned building. The darkness was almost tangible. The headlights of my scooter struggled against it, illuminating only a small circle of the road ahead. Finally, I reached the address. A dilapidated house stood alone, shrouded in darkness. No lights, no signs of life. Just an unsettling silence that seemed to press in from all sides. I parked the scooter, my heart pounding in my chest. As I approached the house, a figure emerged from the darkness, tall, gaunt. His face was obscured by the shadows, but I could feel his eyes on me. He didn't speak, he just stared at me, his silence somehow louder than words. I handed him the pizza, my hand trembling slightly. He took it without a word, and melted back into the darkness, leaving me alone with the unsettling feeling that I was being watched. Section 7. Flight over fight. I didn't wait around. I rushed back to my scooter, my mind racing with unanswered questions and unsettling possibilities. The encounter left me shaken, the image of the man's piercing gaze seared into my memory. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. The darkness seemed to hold its breath, hiding secrets I wasn't meant to uncover. That night I vowed never to return to that part of town. Section 8. Back to the Twilight Zone. The place where reality blurs and the unknown lurks in every shadow. Weeks later, another late-night shift. The air was thick with an eerie silence, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. The familiar quiet of the restaurant was shattered by the ringing phone. Another delivery. Another unfamiliar address. The phone's shrill ring echoed in the empty room, sending a shiver down my spine. But this time there was a chilling familiarity to it. The same gruff voice, the same simple order, and the same address. It felt like a scene from a recurring nightmare. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, but curiosity and duty pushed me forward. Deja vu or something more sinister. The streets seemed to whisper secrets, and every shadow felt alive. I had no choice but to go. The weight of the unknown pressed heavily on my shoulders. The customer is always right, even when they're shrouded in mystery. With a deep breath, I approached the door, ready to face whatever awaited me on the other side. Section 9. Seeking Answers. The drive was just as I remembered it, the same desolate road, the same oppressive darkness. The trees on either side seemed to close in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to grab me. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant cry of a nocturnal animal, and the same dilapidated house standing alone like a tombstone in the night. Its windows were dark, like empty eye sockets staring into the void. The air around it felt colder, as if the house itself was exuding a chilling aura. This time, however, the man was waiting for me. His silhouette was barely visible against the dim light of the moon, but I could sense his presence, a silent sentinel watching my every move. He stood on the porch, a flickering lantern casting long, dancing shadows around him. The light from the lantern seemed to fight against the darkness, creating an eerie play of light and shadow that made the scene even more surreal. I approached cautiously, my heart pounding in my chest. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the very ground was trying to hold me back. My hands clenched into fists, a mix of fear and determination driving me forward. "Do you believe in ghosts?" he asked, his voice raspy as if unused for years. The question was unexpected, catching me off guard. It was as if he could see into my soul, probing for an answer I wasn't sure I had. The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. It felt like a test, a challenge to confront my deepest fears and uncertainties. I didn't know how to answer. My mind raced, searching for the right words, but all I could find was confusion and doubt. The weight of his gaze made it even harder to think clearly. Was he being literal, or was this some cryptic warning? The ambiguity of his question left me unsettled, wondering what hidden truths lay behind his words. The night seemed to grow darker, the air thicker with tension as I stood there, waiting for what would come next. Section 10. The Unanswered Question. I muttered a quick goodnight and hurried back to my scooter, leaving the man and his question unanswered. The night was cold, and the streets were eerily quiet, amplifying the sense of unease that had settled over me. The encounter left me with more questions than answers. Who was this man? His eyes had a strange glint, almost as if he knew something I didn't. Why did he keep ordering pizza to this abandoned house? The place looked like it hadn't been lived in for years, yet he seemed so familiar with it. And what did he mean by his cryptic question about ghosts? His words echoed in my mind, making me question the reality of what I had just experienced. The experience left an indelible mark on me. I couldn't shake off the feeling that I had stumbled upon something far bigger than a simple pizza delivery, a chilling reminder that sometimes the most ordinary situations can take an unexpected turn into the unknown. The streets I once knew now seemed filled with hidden secrets and untold stories. To this day, I still wonder about the man in the shadows and the secrets he held. His presence lingers in my thoughts, a haunting reminder of that fateful night.
The night was dark and quiet, with only the occasional rustle of leaves breaking the silence. It was late December, and the air was cold, biting through layers of clothing and chilling to the bone. 17-year-old Alex shivered and pulled his old sweater tighter around him, trying to keep the cold at bay. He had been working the night shift at Mr. Johnson's corner store for a month now, ever since his father fell ill. He was saving up for a new baseball bat because his old one had broken during a neighborhood game. Alex straightened the snacks on the shelves, even though they were already neat, a habit he had developed to pass the time. His stomach rumbled, reminding him of the sandwiches his mum had packed for him earlier that evening. He would eat them later. Right now, he had to stay busy, keeping his mind off the cold and the loneliness. Otherwise, the night would feel too long and lonely, stretching endlessly before him. The only sound was the metal sign outside, clanging in the wind, a constant reminder of the desolation. He looked at the old clock on the wall. It was 11:45 p.m., almost time for the midnight rush. Almost time for the midnight rush, when the store would come alive for a brief moment. A few taxi drivers and maybe someone looking for a late-night snack would stop by. Same faces, different nights, a routine he had come to know well. But tonight would be different, very different. Something in the air felt off, a sense of anticipation that made his heart race. The bell above the door jingled, signaling another customer entering the store. Old Mrs. Thompson walked in, her cane tapping rhythmically on the tile floor, a sound that had become a comforting part of the store's daily soundtrack. She bought her usual carton of milk and a pack of biscuits, just like she did every other day, her routine as predictable as the sunrise. John exchanged greetings with her, a routine that made him feel safe and grounded. Minutes passed slowly, each second stretching into the next. Then he saw him. A man wearing a hooded jacket was standing by the magazine rack. He wasn't a regular, and his presence felt out of place. John couldn't see his face because it was hidden in the shadows of the hood, making it impossible to read his intentions. He felt a knot in his stomach, a feeling he couldn't explain, but knew he couldn't ignore. The man looked at John, and their eyes met for a brief, intense moment that seemed to last an eternity. John quickly looked away, his heart pounding in his chest like a drum. He pretended to rearrange some candy bars, his mind racing with questions and unease. Who was this stranger? And why was he just standing there, not buying anything, just watching? Minutes turned into a long, uncomfortable hour. The stranger didn't move. He seemed to be reading a magazine, but John noticed his eyes would look up every few seconds, always watching, always observing. John tried to focus on his work. He counted loaves of bread, wiped down the counter, anything to distract himself from the growing unease in his stomach. He told himself he was being silly. Maybe the man was just a night owl, finding comfort in reading. But deep down, a voice told him something wasn't right. He reached for the small cricket bat he kept under the counter. It wasn't much, but it made him feel a little safer. The bell jingled again. 2 college students, laughing about something, came in and bought bags of chips and soda. Their carefree chatter was a sharp contrast to the tension that had gripped Alex. They left, and the sound of the bell faded into the night. The silence returned, heavier than before. The stranger was now at the counter, holding a pack of cigarettes. Alex's breath caught in his throat. He tried to appear calm, but his hands trembled as he rang up the purchase. The man leaned closer. Alex could smell the stale cigarette smoke on his clothes. "You're new here, aren't you?" the stranger rasped, his voice low and rough. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. He managed a weak nod, avoiding the stranger's intense gaze. What did this man want? "Do you know where I can find—" The stranger paused, his voice a menacing whisper. "A phone booth around here? Need to make a call. It's urgent." Jake's mind raced. There used to be a phone booth a few blocks down, but it had been removed months ago. He stammered, There used to be one, down the street, but it's gone now." The stranger's face twisted in what seemed like anger. He slammed his hand on the counter, making Jake flinch. "Are you sure?" the stranger pressed, his eyes burning into Jake. "Think, boy, it's important." Fear choked Jake's voice. He could only shake his head, tears welling up in his eyes. He was trapped. Suddenly, the back door swung open. Old Man Johnson, the store owner, walked in. His eyes widened at the scene before him. "Jake, everything all right here?" he asked, his voice full of concern. The stranger straightened up, his demeanor changing instantly. He mumbled something about needing cigarettes and rushed out of the store, disappearing into the night. Jake's legs trembled with relief. He slumped onto his stool, the weight of the encounter crashing down on him. Old Man Johnson rushed over, his face etched with worry. He put a reassuring hand on Jake's shoulder. "What happened, son? Who was that man?" he asked gently. Jake, his voice still shaky, told him everything that had happened. The rest of the night passed by quickly, almost in a blur. Mr. Johnson stayed with Alex, sharing stories and sips of hot chai, their conversation flowing effortlessly. He reassured Alex that he had done nothing wrong, offering comfort and wisdom. "Not all those who wander are lost, son," he'd said, "but some are best avoided. It's important to know the difference." As the first light of dawn painted the sky a hopeful orange, Alex finally left the store feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. His heart was still pounding, but he felt lighter than before, as if a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He realized that night had been a hard lesson, one that he would not soon forget. A lesson in trust, in being careful, in the importance of his own safety, and in understanding the world around him. He understood that the world could be a scary place, full of uncertainties and hidden dangers. But he also learned that night that even in the darkest times, kindness and help can come from the most unexpected places. He had been lucky to find a friend in Mr. Johnson. Next time he would be prepared, armed with the lessons he had learned and the wisdom shared by his newfound friend.
Greengrow Nights, Boston, a city of history, secrets, and whispers on the wind. Nestled in its heart was Greengrow, a beacon of fresh produce and late-night snacks. But beneath its cheerful facade, a darkness lurked, waiting to ensnare those who dared to work after the sun went down. My name is Sara. I was a student then, working the graveyard shift at Greengrow to make ends meet. The pay was decent, but the silence of the empty aisles always sent shivers down my spine. Each night felt like stepping into a horror movie. Late shift jitters. Every clang of the metal shutters as I pulled them down, every creak of the floorboards under my sneakers sent my heart racing. I wasn't cut out for this, not really. The news was always filled with stories of women disappearing, attacked on their way home from work. Fear was my constant companion. My parents begged me to quit. "Find something else, Sara," they'd plead. But I was stubborn, determined to prove I could handle it. Little did I know what awaited me in those silent aisles. Shadows in the parking lot. It was a Wednesday, I think. The rain was coming down in sheets, blurring the streetlights into halos of yellow. I was closing up, my hands shaking as I counted the register. Just as I was about to lock up, I saw them. A woman and a teenage girl, huddled under the flickering streetlight at the edge of the parking lot. The woman was tall and thin, her face obscured by a dark hood. The girl, pale and gaunt, stared at me with eyes that seemed to burn right through me. It was a typical evening at the grocery store, the kind where the mundane tasks of life blend into the background. But tonight, something felt off. The air was thick with an unspoken tension, and the dim lights cast long, eerie shadows that seemed to dance with a life of their own. I hurried out, my heart pounding in my chest. The parking lot, usually a place of routine and normalcy, now felt like a stage set for a nightmare. Every step I took echoed in the stillness, amplifying my growing sense of unease. I glanced around, my eyes darting from shadow to shadow, searching for the source of my fear. "Can I help you with something?" I asked, trying to sound brave. My voice wavered slightly, betraying the calm facade I was desperately trying to maintain. The store was nearly empty, and the few remaining customers seemed oblivious to the creeping dread that was slowly enveloping me. The woman just shook her head slowly, her gaze never leaving mine. Her eyes were dark, almost hollow, and they seemed to pierce through me, seeing something I couldn't. It was as if she knew something I didn't, a secret that hung heavy in the air between us. The girl remained silent, her eyes boring into me. There was an unsettling intensity in her stare, a silent communication of fear and warning. I felt a shiver run down my spine, the kind that makes your hair stand on end and your skin prickle with goosebumps. I felt a chill run down my spine, a sense of dread so profound it stole my breath away. The cold night air seemed to seep into my bones, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. My instincts screamed at me to leave, to run, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. They finally turned and melted into the shadows, leaving me trembling in the cold, damp air. The darkness swallowed them whole, and I was left standing there, alone and vulnerable. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the city and the pounding of my own heart. I locked up quickly, my hands fumbling with the keys. My fingers were numb, both from the cold and the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Each click of the lock felt like a small victory, a barrier between me and the unknown terror that lurked in the night. As I drove home that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, followed by something sinister. The road stretched out before me, dark and empty, but every so often I caught a glimpse of something in my rearview mirror. A fleeting shadow, a pair of eyes, always just out of clear sight. The sense of unease stayed with me, a haunting presence that refused to let go. Whispers in the aisles. They started as faint murmurs, barely audible over the hum of the fluorescent lights. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, a trick of the mind in the quiet of the night. The next few days were torture. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was lurking just out of sight. My heart would race every time I entered the store, and I found myself glancing over my shoulder more often than not. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the old building seemed amplified in the silence. It was as if the store itself was alive, breathing, whispering secrets that I wasn't meant to hear. Every rustle of plastic bags, every flicker of the overhead lights, sounded like footsteps approaching. I would freeze, straining my ears, but there was never anyone there. Shadows seemed to dance at the edge of my vision, twisting and contorting into shapes that defied explanation. I could have sworn I saw figures moving in the darkness, but they would vanish the moment I tried to focus on them. And I could have sworn I heard whispers coming from the empty aisles. They were soft, almost gentle, but filled with a sense of urgency that sent chills down my spine. I would follow the sound, hoping to find the source, but it always led me to empty aisles. But whenever I turned to look, there was nothing there. Just the empty shelves and the oppressive silence. It was maddening, this constant feeling of being on the verge of discovering something, only to be met with emptiness. My coworkers noticed my fear. "You all right, Sarah?" they'd ask, their faces etched with concern. They could see the toll it was taking on me, the sleepless nights and the constant anxiety. They'd ask, their faces etched with concern. I wanted to tell them everything, to share the burden of what I was experiencing, but I couldn't find the words. I'd force a smile and mumble something about exams, hoping they would drop the subject. But the truth was, I was terrified. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality, but I couldn't bring myself to tell them what I had seen, what I felt. The fear of being labeled as crazy was too great. I didn't want to be the subject of gossip, the girl who heard voices in the aisles. They wouldn't believe me, I thought. They'd think it was just stress, or that I was making it up for attention. But I knew what I had heard, what I had seen. They'd think I was going crazy, and maybe I was. But the whispers in the aisles were real, and they were getting louder. The final encounter. Then came Friday night. The city was cloaked in darkness, the streets eerily quiet, and the parking lot where it all began was empty, save for the occasional flicker of a streetlight. The air was thick with anticipation, as if the city itself was holding its breath. It was busier than usual, but the unease remained, a knot of dread in my stomach. The grocery store was bustling with activity, people moving up and down the aisles, their faces a blur of motion. Yet, amidst the chaos, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. As I was stocking shelves, I felt a cold draft and a shiver ran down my spine. The temperature seemed to drop suddenly, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It was as if an invisible presence had entered the room, watching me, waiting. I turned slowly, my breath catching in my throat. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. I scanned the aisles, searching for the source of my unease, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. Yet the feeling of being watched persisted. Standing at the end of the aisle, bathed in the pale light of the overhead fluorescence, was the girl from the parking lot. She seemed out of place, a ghostly figure amidst the mundane surroundings. Her presence was both unsettling and mesmerizing. Her eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on me with an intensity that made my blood run cold. It was as if she could see right through me, her gaze piercing my very soul. I felt exposed, vulnerable, unable to look away. She didn't speak, didn't move. The world around us seemed to fade away, leaving just the two of us in a silent, tense standoff. The noise of the store, the chatter of customers, all became distant echoes. She just stood there, her gaze burning into me like a physical touch. It was a moment suspended in time, a final encounter that would change everything. The weight of her stare was almost unbearable, and I knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same again. Unanswered questions. I stumbled back, knocking over a display of canned goods with a crash. The sound seemed to break the spell. The girl vanished, as quickly and silently as she had appeared. I was left shaking, my heart pounding against my ribs. I quit the next day, unable to spend another minute in that place. Even now, years later, I can't shake the memory of those eyes, the feeling of being watched, hunted. Were they real, those figures in the night? Or were they figments of my imagination, born of fear and late-night loneliness? Some questions, I've learned, are best left unanswered.
The clock ticked past midnight, marking the beginning of another long shift. The world outside was a frozen landscape, silent and still. Another night at the gas station where time seemed to stretch endlessly. The snow continued to fall, each flake adding to the growing blanket of white. Snow fell relentlessly, blanketing everything in a cold, white silence. It was as if the world had been muted, leaving only the sound of snowflakes hitting the ground. I huddled deeper into my jacket, the fluorescent lights buzzing above. The cold seeped through every layer, making me shiver despite my thick clothing. Outside, the wind howled like a restless spirit, swirling the snow into ghostly shapes. It was a night that seemed to have no end. Just another night, I told myself. Another long, lonely night. The isolation was palpable, the silence almost deafening. The coffee had long gone cold, a forgotten relic of the evening. It sat on the counter, untouched, a testament to the slow passage of time. My eyelids felt heavy, the monotony of the night shift settling in. Each minute dragged on, the hours blending together in a haze of fatigue. I yearned for the first light of dawn, for the familiar faces of the morning regulars. Their presence would signal the end of this endless night. Anything to break this eerie silence, this oppressive stillness that seemed to swallow everything. The snow kept falling, a relentless curtain of white obscuring the world outside. It was a night that felt like it would never end. Just me, the hum of the refrigerators, and the unsettling silence. The night shift was a test of endurance, a battle against the encroaching darkness. I straightened a rack of chips for the 10th time. Anything to stay awake. The night shift at the gas station was always the hardest, especially during these long, cold winter nights. The snow outside seemed to muffle every sound, making the silence even more profound. The silence was broken only by the occasional passing truck, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Each truck was a brief reminder that the world outside still existed, even if it felt a million miles away. Each one brought a flicker of hope, a momentary connection to the outside world. I would watch the taillights fade into the distance, feeling a pang of loneliness as they disappeared. But it was fleeting. Soon, I was alone again, with the snow and the silence. The isolation was almost tangible, wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. A sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes. The sound was jarring, a stark contrast to the quiet that had settled in. I looked up, heart pounding. The unexpected noise had sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. Had I imagined it? The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. Every instinct told me something was off. The silence seemed to press in on me, suffocating. It was as if the very air had thickened, making it hard to breathe. I told myself it was just the wind, just the snow. But the rational part of my mind struggled to convince the rest of me. But a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. Something wasn't right. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something unseen was lurking just beyond the edge of the light. Headlights pierced the darkness. Finally, a customer. I watched as a sleek black SUV pulled up to the pumps. It was an expensive car, out of place in this sleepy town. Relief washed over me. Company at last. anything to break the spell. The SUV's engine idled, its exhaust a plume of white in the cold air. But the driver didn't get out. Minutes ticked by. Where was he? Curiosity gave way to a prickle of unease. Perhaps they needed help. Or maybe, just maybe, my instincts were screaming a warning. I stepped outside, the cold air biting at my face. The snow crunched under my boots, the sound amplified in the stillness. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the night. "Can I help you?" There was no answer, just the wind whistling through the gas pumps. I approached the SUV cautiously. The windows were tinted, obscuring the view inside. I noticed something else. Footprints in the snow, leading away from the driver's side door. They disappeared into the darkness beyond the edge of the gas station lights. Why would he park here and walk away? The knot in my stomach tightened. A sudden noise from inside the store made me jump. I spun around, heart pounding in my chest. Someone was inside. I fumbled for the flashlight under the counter, my hand shaking. Fear propelled me forward, adrenaline coursing through my veins. I crept down the aisle, flashlight beam dancing in the darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows. A man, tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to bore into me. He wore a long coat, its collar pulled up high. "Just getting some coffee," he mumbled, his voice raspy, his hand hidden in his pocket. But I saw it, the glint of metal, a knife. Panic seized me. I stumbled back, knocking over a display of chips. He didn't even flinch, just stood there watching me, his eyes cold and calculating. I fumbled for the phone, my fingers trembling. Dialing 911, I blurted out my location, my voice high-pitched and frantic. The wail of sirens pierced the night. The man's head snapped up, his eyes widening for the first time. He hesitated, then turned and bolted out the door, disappearing into the swirling snow. Relief washed over me, weak and shaky. The police arrived moments later, their faces grim as they took my statement. The police searched for hours, but the man in the SUV was gone, vanished without a trace. The snow fell heavily, masking any evidence that might have been left behind. The officers combed through the area, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, but it was as if he had never been there at all. They assured me I was safe now, but their words rang hollow. The fear gnawed at me, a constant reminder of the night's events. I could still feel his presence, lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to strike. The image of his eyes, cold and calculating, was seared into my mind. Those eyes, filled with a chilling intensity, haunted my every thought. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was always watching, always waiting. I closed the gas station early that night, my hands still trembling. The usual routine felt foreign, every sound amplified in the stillness of the night. The snow continued to fall, a silent witness to my growing unease. As I turned to leave, I saw him. My heart raced, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. He stood there, a dark silhouette against the snowy backdrop, his presence as menacing as ever. Standing across the street, shrouded in the shadows of a nearby building. His figure was barely visible, but I knew it was him. The same man who had vanished without a trace. He didn't move, just watched me, his eyes burning into me. The intensity of his gaze was unnerving, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if he could see right through me, into my very soul. Then, as quickly as he appeared, he was gone. The shadow swallowed him up, leaving me standing there, paralyzed with fear. The snow continued to fall, erasing any sign of his presence. The snow continued to fall, covering his tracks, erasing him from sight. But no amount of snow could erase the memory of his eyes or the terror that now gripped my heart. But he couldn't erase the fear that now lived inside me. It was a fear that would stay with me, a constant reminder of that night, a fear that would never truly go away. He was out there, somewhere, watching, waiting. The thought of his return was always in the back of my mind, a shadow that loomed over every moment. And I would never forget the night I met the man in the black SUV. It was a night that changed everything, a night that left me forever looking over my shoulder, wondering if he would come back.